Welcome to Sierra College's Demystifying Vote by Mail webinar, one of a series of webinars from our Civic Engagement and Voter Empowerment Project. Our panelists are California Secretary of State Alex Padilla and Dr. Mindy Romero. As California Secretary of State, Alex Padilla is focused on modernizing the office, increasing voter registration and participation, and strengthening voting rights. In 2018, he launched the California Motor Voter Program, which automatically registers eligible Californians to vote when they obtain or renew their state ID or driver's license. The program registered 1 million new voters in its first year alone. In November 2019, California reached a record high 20.3 million registered voters. Secretary Padilla also oversaw the 2018 election, in which 64.5% of registered voters cast a ballot, the highest turnout for a gubernatorial election since 1982. Secretary Padilla sponsored legislation in 2015 to establish vote centers, expand early voting, and implement same-day conditional voter registration through the Voters' Choice Act. Previously, he served 2 terms in the San Fernando Valley in the California State Senate and represented the East San Fernando Valley on the Los Angeles City Council. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley, attended local public schools, and graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a degree in mechanical engineering. Dr. Mindy Romero is the founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy, formerly the California Civic Engagement Project, at the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy. Dr. Romero is a political sociologist and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California, Davis. Her research focuses on political behavior and race/ethnicity and seeks to explain patterns of voting and political underrepresentation, particularly among youth and communities of color in California and the United States. Our student interviewers are TJ Bahia and Camelia Veraste. TJ Bahia is the student body president and student trustee at Sierra College, and she formerly served as an officer regionally and statewide for the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. She regularly advocates for education accessibility and champions efforts to empower student voices across the state. Camelia Veraste is a journalist and anchor for Sierra College's news site, Roundhouse. She loves researching and telling stories. As an aspiring news anchor, she has a passion for finding out the truth and telling people about it. Camelia also enjoys classical music and is a cellist. She is majoring in journalism and minoring in music. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. TJ will begin our interview.
Thank you, Betty. Secretary Padilla, prior to the pandemic, states have had different approaches to vote by mail. These approaches include all voters receiving mail-in ballots automatically, which currently occurs in 5 states: Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Utah. No excuse absentee voting, where any qualified voter may vote absentee without offering an excuse, which occurs in 27 states. An excuse required to vote absentee, effective in 18 states. Before the pandemic, which category did California fall under?
So before the pandemic, California was in the no excuse needed to be able to vote by mail, although for the last couple of decades, voting by mail has been growing in popularity. In our March 3rd, 2020 primary, for example, more than 70% of voters statewide, registered voters, received a mail-in ballot, and more than 70% of the ballots cast. Every active registered voter a ballot in the mail for this November 2020 election. So it can move us over into the other column with the 5 other states.
Awesome. So you mentioned that for the November 2020 election, vote by mail has changed for California. When will registered voters begin to receive these vote by mail ballots? And if a registered voter does not receive such a ballot, what can they do?
Both very, very good questions. So we are getting ready to launch a series of voter education campaigns to let people know what their options will be to be able to vote and to vote safely this November, as we're still in the midst of a health pandemic. So I think the most convenient, the most secure, and frankly the safest way to vote will be by mail. All active registered voters will receive their ballot in the mailbox at about 29 days before the election, so the first week of October. We're a big state with more than 20 million voters, so not everybody will receive it the same day. Some people will get it 29 days out, 28 days out, 30 days out, but about a month before the election. That first week of October is when to keep an eye out for the ballot in your mailbox. For members of the military and Americans living overseas, they will get their ballot even earlier than that.
And if they do not receive their ballot, what can they do?
Right. So one of the things that we want to recommend to make sure people do receive their ballot at the correct location is to verify their registration status. Right. For as much as we encourage and promote voter registration, right? Register to vote, register to vote. Anybody who's already registered to vote can go to voter status at sos.ca.gov and just confirm that your voter registration record is up to date and current, and that we have your best mailing address for you, so we're sending the ballot to the proper location. If for some reason you don't receive a ballot in the mail, you can contact your local county to make sure. And there will be in-person voting opportunities as well in most counties for in-person voting over the course of at least 4 days. So you don't have to wait till Tuesday, November 3rd to be able to show up in person. That's another option that you have. If you don't receive the ballot in the mail, or if you do and you lose it, or if you do and you make a mistake, you can get that ballot replaced by showing up at any polling place or vote center in your county.
Once a voter votes by mail, do they automatically receive an absentee ballot for future elections?
No, just because you vote by mail once doesn't guarantee that you will get a vote by mail ballot for all future elections. The way to do that, if that's your preference, is to update your voter registration. One of the questions that it has there after you confirm your name, your address, your date of birth, etc., is do you want to be a permanent vote by mail voter? If you check that box on your voter registration record, then the county will know to send you a ballot in advance of every single election going forward. If you don't, you can still vote by mail, which you'll be requesting that vote by mail ballot each election at a time.
And for these individuals who want to vote by mail, how do they submit their ballots? What options do they have?
Great question, because getting the ballot from the county to the voter is just half the step, right? The other is how do voters get their completed ballot back to the county? The most convenient way is to simply mail the ballot back. In California, you should know that return postage is prepaid. So if you're worried about, do you have stamps or do you have enough stamps? No stamps, no problem. Return postage is prepaid. But voters also have the option of delivering their ballot to any secure drop box in their county. Counties install ballot drop boxes in different communities, and any voter can deliver their ballot to any drop box convenient to them in the weeks leading up to the election. There's also a lot of voters who like to receive the ballot in the mail, take their time filling it out at home, but then show up in person to drop it off. And that's another option for voters. Any polling place, any vote center in your county, you can drop it off. And, come election day, you find yourself in a pinch, an unexpected appointment, and you can't drop it off in person, you can designate whomever you trust to return the ballot for you. So many, many options for returning the ballot. The one thing I will emphasize for people mailing it back, it's important that the ballot is postmarked on or before election day to be counted. If you don't mail it until after the election, it will not count. Postmark on or before election day.
And is it possible for a voter to track their vote by mail ballot?
Another great question. And so, yes, in the interest of providing more transparency and accountability and public confidence in vote by mail, we've launched a ballot tracking tool available to all voters in the state called Where's My Ballot? We try to find a catchy name, easy to remember. You can subscribe to receive email messages, text messages, or automated phone calls with the status of your ballot as it's working its way through the mail delivery process, both on the way to the voter and on its way back to the county. And imagine the peace of mind that comes with getting a confirmation message that your ballot was received and your ballot was counted. So you can find this tool and a lot more resources at vote.ca.gov. Scroll down to Where's My Ballot and subscribe today.
Awesome. And you mentioned posted paid ballots, but if an individual does not have their postage paid on their ballot, what is the role in the post office in this? Like, what happens to their ballot?
So their ballot will be delivered. That should not be an issue. The postage is prepaid, again, so voters don't have to worry about stamps. And we work hand in hand with Postal Service representatives throughout the state of California to make sure that they know the timelines, they know the rules, they know that when it comes to election time, election mail, especially ballots, is the top priority for being delivered. Right? The grocery store ads, if that has to wait an extra day, that'll wait an extra day, but the ballots have to be delivered on time.
So it's my understanding that approximately 75% of California voters are already voting by mail. Despite this high number of absentee voters, there are still millions more who will need to vote in person. Will there be enough vote centers or polling sites within each county?
Yes, in California, we are working hard to make sure that we have as many in-person opportunities to vote safely for the people who need to do it in person. Maybe it's a concern about accessibility, or maybe they need language assistance, or a replacement ballot, as I mentioned earlier. So every county has to meet a minimum number of in-person voting locations in their county. In a few counties, they think they're going to have enough polling places and poll workers to run the election the traditional way, and that's fine. But even there, every voter will receive a ballot in the mail automatically. In other counties, there may be some consolidations in terms of number of voting locations, but in exchange, they have to provide for at least 4 days of voting, 3 days of early voting at a minimum, plus election day itself. And again, statewide, every active registered voter will get a ballot in the mail automatically. Frankly, that's going to be the first choice. We're going to encourage people to vote by mail if they can, return the ballot early if they can. More people who vote early, whether it's by mail or in person, will mean shorter lines, smaller crowds, and a safer experience on election day for voters and election workers alike.
And where can voters find information about these locations?
So every voter will be receiving information from their county as to where their designated voting location is or what their options are for where they can vote in person. That information will also be available online at your county elections department website, or closer to election day, you can go to the Secretary of State's website at sos.ca.gov. Go straight to the voting information, vote.ca.gov. Scroll down to find my polling place. You can look it up online, or you can call our voter hotline at 1-800-345-VOTE.
Are there enough poll workers to staff these voting centers and polling sites?
So I believe come November we will be ready, but as of right now, we are still in need of additional poll workers. There's a lot of senior citizens and retirees that have helped administer the election in years past that are not going to be available this November because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're actively recruiting new poll workers. If you or anybody you know would be interested and are healthy enough to do it, please do so. Reach out to our office at Democracy at Work, all one word, Democracy at Work at sos.ca.gov, and we'll connect you with your local county. Know that you'll get sufficient training, number one, to be able to know what you're doing, working the polls. Number two, there is compensation involved. Poll workers do receive a stipend. And number three, that we're going to make sure that it's a safe experience for everybody. So in addition to making sure there's enough ballots and enough booths, we're ordering enough hand sanitizer and masks and gloves and signs for physical distancing, all the public health measures we need to implement to make sure that it's a safe experience for everybody.
I'm glad that you mentioned the safety measures that are going into voting, because I assume anyone who needs to vote in person may have some concerns because of the pandemic. We also have Dr. Romero here on the webinar with us, and she will be answering some questions based on her research on vote by mail.
Thank you, TJ. Now, Dr. Romero, besides the 5 automatic vote-by-mail states, is California the only state in the nation that is sending every voter a ballot by mail in response to COVID-19?
No, it's not. There are a few other states, Nevada, Vermont, New Jersey, I believe, and the District of Columbia, and then we're waiting to see if potentially some more states will join that list.
Wow. And as mentioned earlier, about 3/4 of eligible California voters use vote by mail. Why do people vote by mail?
So there's lots of reasons. So kind of putting aside the pandemic, because obviously there's additional concern around health and safety going to a physical location to vote. Generally speaking, over the last decade and a half, California, the percent of ballots that are cast that are actually vote by mail ballots has steadily increased. The last primary election in March, 72% of all ballots cast in our state were vote by mail ballots. Not all of them go through the mail. Some are dropped off either at a local vote center or polling place, or dropped off at a drop box or elections office. We've done some research to understand that question, and essentially it does vary by group, by race, ethnicity, and age. But really broadly, people that use vote by mail do it because of convenience, because of work hours, because they want to sit around the table and be able to talk and take their time and have their research next to them as they're filling out their ballot. And then at the flip side, voting in person, many people still prefer, even in our state, right, to vote in person, about 30% generally speaking in any given election. And there are deep reasons for that. It can be because they want, it's a habit, it's important to them, it's what they always do. It could also be because they want to represent their community, represent voting to their children, but to their greater community, be seen. They want to be able to go down and ask questions. Maybe they need assistance with language and language materials. They could be a voter with disability that literally wants and needs to use an accessible voting machine. So there's lots of reasons why people still choose to vote in person. And we need to keep that in mind too as we're talking about vote by mail. Not everybody will transition to vote by mail, even in our state. And our election officials are accounting for that and making sure that we still have robust in-person voting options.
Wow. And what are the differences in vote by mail use rates across different user groups?
Yeah, that's an important one. So I just gave that stat, 72%, right? Mm-hmm. In the primary, all ballots cast being vote by mail. We know that in any given election, voters of color, more specifically Latinos and African Americans, tend to use or do use vote by mail in lower rates. So the share of their ballots that are vote by mail ballots are lower than for white voters. Young voters, age 18 to 24, also lower than older voters, and definitely much lower than senior voters. If you are military status, if you're foreign born, if you use language ballots, ballots in a language other than English, also have different use rates around vote by mail. And so when we talk about policies around vote by mail and trying to meet the needs of vote by mail voters or in-person voters, understanding those differences by subgroup are really important in outreach and education and in just basic services.
Great. And Dr. Romero, there are several reports from USC Center for Inclusive Democracy that address whether there is a partisan impact for vote by mail. Could you speak more about this?
Yes. I've done some research with colleagues actually at Center for, I direct the Center for Inclusive Democracy, but I've done some research with colleagues at UC San Diego, UC Merced, and other places. And we've found that there is, and we're not the only ones, there's lots of research out there that now consistently shows there's not a partisan benefit from vote by mail, despite some of the rhetoric we've heard right in our larger kind of media and kind of political landscape. Period.
And according to a Reuters poll conducted in April 2020, during the pandemic, 72% of all US adults said that they would support a requirement for mail-in ballots as a way to protect voters. During the pandemic, is there strong bipartisan support for vote by mail?
Yeah, and that happens to be 72%, just a different stat, right? There is strong bipartisan support, and I think that's an important question. So certainly in our state, historically, there has been. Leading up to November, our governor issued a few months ago an executive order mailing everybody in our state, if you're registered to vote actively, a vote by mail ballot. There was some initial challenge from the Republican Party just on the legality of the executive order, but once that was codified into law through a bill, there's continued bipartisan support. So historically and now, and if you look across the country, we know that you can't escape it in the news. Of course, the President of the United States has frequently and fervently, talked about the dangers around vote by mail, about fraud, about a partisan benefit. But if you look at state houses, and both at the state level and local level across states in this country, there is a lot of support by Republicans who historically, right, recognize that many of their voters use vote by mail and understand, aside from politics and the question around partisan benefit, again, none, that this is the right thing to do to make sure that people aren't disenfranchised, that they have access, that they don't have to choose their health, right, and their right to vote. Having a vote by mail option. Now, in many states, aside from our Western states where we use vote by mail in such large numbers, we're still going to probably see a lower percentage of folks. Some states historically, only 6% or 10% of all ballots cast are vote by mail. We'll see increases, but we will not see, everybody using vote by mail. But it's important to make it available, to make it actually really accessible and easy for voters, not just available, but actually easy and accessible. And there's bipartisan, in many places across the country, robust bipartisan support around vote by mail.
Wow, that is really great information. Thank you so much, Dr. Romero. And now TJ will continue our conversation about vote by mail with Secretary of State Padilla and Dr. Romero.
Thank you, Camelia. Given how large your state is, many voters won't hear about these changes in response to the pandemic. At Sierra College, we are getting the word out through these webinars, social media, and our website. Secretary Padilla and Dr. Romero, what would you recommend to our viewers about getting the word out about voting and vote by mail?
Well, I'll go first if that's okay. First, let's make sure that we are informed ourselves. And so when you verify your registration status or register to vote for the first time, if you haven't done it already, make sure you include a good email address as part of your record. That'll allow the Secretary of State's office to directly email you all the information you need, including some reminders along the way of important deadlines and your options for voting. There's a lot of information, and it's not always correct on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram when it comes to elections. So make sure you're relying on the official sources of information, your county elections office or the Secretary of State. And once you've informed yourself about how to vote, when and where to vote, make sure you're spreading that official information as well with your networks. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, your classmates, your coworkers, your neighbors, and encourage everybody to do their part.
So it's absolutely critically important that we get the word out to all voters, all potential voters in our state, especially historically underrepresented groups. Anytime you have a major change, it's only as good, right, if assuming it's a positive change, a new reform, election reform, as voters are aware of it, and also that as much as they are, as much as it's possible that they're comfortable with it as well. This is a significant change in November in our society, in voting, period. People are going to get those vote by mail ballots that have never seen a vote by mail ballot before. There's going to be changes in their locations of where they can vote because of COVID. Locations are kind of changing around, and some locations are dropping out and don't want to be vote centers. New locations are going to be coming into the fold that are volunteering to be vote centers and polling places. So people need to know the nuts and bolts of what the changes are, how to use a vote by mail ballot, how to access in-person voting, how to get information from their local voting office. But they also need to trust that information. And we found that it's really important that trusted messengers are involved in that outreach and communication. And probably most importantly, what they're talking about, they're really conveying the why. So they're explaining to folks that the changes that have been made, not assuming that just because, you know, it's under the COVID umbrella that people will assume that it's a good thing and that it's a positive thing, explaining why the changes were made, why this way, not that way, that they were made ultimately, right, to ensure access as opposed to limiting access. That's really important. And then let me just add too, I can't understate the challenge it will be to get this word out to people, to get not only the nuts and bolts, but all of the, you know, the trust factor as well, kind of disseminated as much as possible. We are really in a kind of a barren landscape in terms of funding for voter education and outreach. The Secretary of State's office has gotten some funding from the federal government through the CARES Act. That's great. But we know in terms of our philanthropic foundations that usually they're the ones that send, you know, funding and grants to nonprofit groups that often are the ones that work with historically underrepresented groups. Young people are historically underrepresented youth. That landscape is really dry right now. And we're hearing across the state and across the country that local elections offices and certainly nonprofit groups, community groups, have a monumental task ahead of them in getting the word out about the changes around voting and, again, making people feel comfortable with those. And they're doing it with very few resources. And they're doing it in the COVID environment, right? So it's limited in terms of the type of contact, right? They're having to change their strategies also in terms of how they actually engage people and spread the word and talk to people about these changes. So just want to emphasize that it's not like, oh, we make these changes, they're fantastic, you know, they're hopefully all positive across the board, and we're just going to tell people and we're going to be good to go. The telling people, the outreach and communication, I just can't, again, emphasize what a task that will be. And that will mean that young people are part of that. So on college campuses, right, and in their peer groups, spreading the word about the importance of voting, period, and then spreading the word about how to vote and their options this November in the COVID environment is really important, particularly for young people who are first time unfamiliar, may not know how to access information, may not know how to, you know, talk to their local elections officials, may not yet be registered, so they're not getting that kind of information through the mail. Peer-to-peer contact is critically important in spreading the word, and everybody can play a role.
Thank you both for taking the time to be here for the webinar and informing the public on vote by mail. Individuals interested in finding more information can visit the Secretary of State's website at sos.ca.gov and Sierra College's Civic Engagement and Voter Empowerment webpage, which can be found at sierracollege.edu/vote. Thank you.
Thank you.